After 4 long years of waiting, God of War Ragnarok is finally out and playable, if you have a PlayStation, which I don't. I don't even have the space to own one, I only have a PC to play it on. So instead, I wait. Are you listening, Santa Monica Studio? Waiting isn't fun. Waiting isn't rewarding, character building, or whatever other bullshit some parental figure might have tried to sell you on. Like, I know it costs a lot of time and money, and I know there's probably a lot going on with exclusivity deals and whatnot, but work with me here. I ask of you, nay, I demand, give me God of War. We're starting out on New Game Plus, so I actually have runic attacks at the beginning of the game. Otherwise, the rules are relatively simple. All of my damage will be from runic attacks and summons where possible. For the purposes of the run, I'm counting the axe returning to my hand as part of a runic attack, because a good number of the options are terrible, so thrown runic attacks were my best friend. For the unfamiliar, they're the stronger attacks that you have available, but each has a cooldown, usually to match how useful they are. When they're on cooldown, I'm gonna be useless this run. Like the last time, I'm allowed to block and even parry, but I'm not allowed to deal damage with the shield. This means that if I accidentally parry a projectile, I have to reset to the last checkpoint. While my child will be helping throughout the playthrough by way of runic summons, I won't be ordering him to attack unless there's no alternative. This is only ever needed in one encounter, and we'll get to that. Because I hate myself, I guess, I also swore off of resurrection stones. This isn't directly related to the challenge, but here we are. While I'll be making use of the passive abilities of talismans, and you could arguably do this as an active ability run to make it just that much easier, I did not. Runic only means runic only. No active talisman abilities. Importantly though, the game forces you to attack some things. It forces you to enter Spartan Rage, where you can't use runic anything. It has you using almost every feature it gives you to take on various environmental problems. And consider this my hand wave. Unless some major sequence breaks are discovered, I believe this is about as close as is possible to get to a pure runic-only run. Now because I decided to take on the hardest difficulty only using attacks that each take at least 30 seconds to cool down, the literal first combat encounter of the game took me about an hour to get through. So yeah, things are going pretty well. After spending over an hour experimenting with different runic attacks to find what works and what doesn't, you'd think that I might have a better idea of how to handle things. You would, however, be mistaken. Most Draugr seem to buff themselves with fire, making themselves faster, giving their attacks area of effect, and making them unblockable. While these of course are issues, they're not where the issues end. You can remove the buff by hitting them once. It's removed, but the attack is negated. Given that I can only attack 4 times before being completely halted by cooldowns at the moment, that's a substantial problem. They do sometimes lose the buff through a few different ways, but none substantial enough to rely on. This is something that I'd deal with until the very end of the game. The 4 I primarily used were 2 different axe throws, a quick burst of fire, and Kratos pulling himself to enemies to give him what for. Taking my boy hunting to prepare to honor the wishes of my late wife, I helped to kill an animal with everyone near and dear to Kratos. Atreus is traumatized by the harsh realities of the life that he's been thrust into, and we get into an altercation with a local troll. Don't worry, boy, I'm unstoppable. I'm unbeatable. I'm out of breath. I'm gonna need just a minute. Hang on, son. Your dad just needs to sit down for a few minutes. Really, though, the action economy states that in the battle of one versus many, the many will usually win, unless the balance of power is drastically out of whack. I may not be good at this game, but I'm good enough to defeat an enemy that can't close distance or use ranged attacks without any real issue. So a one-on-one fight like this is significantly easier than even just a couple of Draugr. Atreus violently projects his insecurities onto a corpse, and instead of helping to reassure him or learn from this experience, I inform him that he's not good enough to fulfill his mother's dying wish, and we're going home. A+ parenting! I briefly forgot which run I was doing, and had to reset. This happened more times than I would care to admit, so just know that in this run, I'll be playing the part of the god of wasting my own fucking time. Looks like I found the one enemy as exhausted as Kratos for this run. Kindness would dictate that I leave this poor sap alone, but my need to kill it to progress says... One of the lighter notes of this run, I made a discovery that I was both proud and ashamed to find. In my last run for the game, I was playing by way of only throwing things. The rules were very similar otherwise. Well, you can't have rage by this point in a new playthrough, and no axe throw that I know of can hurt ice enemies directly, but you can simply backtrack a bit. The enemy and Atreus will follow you. The AI for it sucks, but if you keep Atreus near it long enough, he can hit it doing a tiny bit of damage. Meaning it is entirely possible to get by this enemy without ever using alternative methods. So, my previous run for the game can be done even just a little bit better. In any case, I have the Blades of Chaos, so, I collect my wife's ashes to scatter from the highest peak in all the realms. Kratos tries to give the lesson in anger management, while also ironically displaying very poor anger management. Baldur then shows up at my house, demanding something, but he refuses to elaborate on what it is he's after. So even if I wanted to, how would I give it to him? He may be Odin's best tracker, but he's a terrible communicator. He can follow anything except for a conversation. I'll get him with Hunter Killer! Yeah, I can't do that. Restart! Ah, fuck. So Baldur is really fast. He has a simple moveset though, so while he can dodge a lot of my attacks, I can block most of his. The one that I can't is really easily sidestepped. So, like everything else in this run, it's not fast, not even remotely, but I get by. I counter his attacks because not attacking is an option. And I don't have any candy for him, but I've still got a treat! He threatens my child, and Kratos may be a mass murderer, he may be a terrible friend and father, he may be absolutely horrible at communicating and or handling his emotions, but nobody threatens his boy. I'm forced into Spartan Rage. I can't do runic attacks as a result, but the left bumper is used to block and trigger runic attacks. In Rage mode it lets you stomp. Gee gosh golly, I'm so mad about this whole thing. Forcing me to give him a good stomping. Just look how frustrated Kratos is. As soon as I can, I exit out of it to continue the fight as before. It's whatever. I play a quick game of rock, head, scissors, and I know he's effectively invulnerable, but holy shit! Surprising nobody, the fight isn't over, and thus begins phase 3. For the record, still not a hard fight, but he keeps looping the same voice lines over and fucking over. Don't get me wrong, I really like the voice work that was done for Baldur, but I just wanted more variety with the fight taking so long. Also, apparently you can accidentally counterattack off of a block, so I got to restart this lovely fight. After telling him repeatedly to leave my home, he finally snaps to it. We're no longer safe here, and head out, taking a little more than the weapons on our backs. The game introduces ranged enemies, which weren't so bad in my first playthrough, but they do a lot of damage in this one, and I can't really do anything about them a lot of the time. Gotta wait forever while dodging, trying not to accidentally parry their projectiles, and also evading the melee enemies. This took a while. Ranged runic attacks can still hit them, so I got through them, and soon after I got a combat with a fairly large number of enemies. It went fairly well, actually, but then I messed up, and had to redo it several times. Like every other fucking combat. Assume that if there's combat, I struggled with it, unless stated otherwise. I have runic summons that can target enemies, so I can't believe I'm saying it, but for the most part, Revenants weren't comparatively that bad this run. Like, they were bad, sure, but everything else was somehow worse in this nightmare of a run. We're attacked by living humans that are also cannibals. Extremely unethical cannibals. Like, I get that people will often do some really fucked up shit to survive, but they talk about not having had meat in a really long time. But in general areas of the game, there are birds, frogs, and fish everywhere. So either they don't know what the hell they're doing, or they're really lazy about the whole only living humans we ever see in Midgard thing. My son kills his first and last human for this playthrough, and he's pretty understandably shaken. But Kratos, being the jaded man that he is, only really has the advice of not feeling emotions. Thanks, I'm cured! We meet a grumpy old dwarf who doesn't pull his weight nearly enough this run, in my opinion. My armor does fuck all. Also, I gotta throw the axe. Technically at an enemy, but it also doesn't actually hit anything. And you have no real control of the scene, so... Oh boy, will you look at that view! Why, back in my day, we used to walk uphill both ways through 500 miles of snow just to fall down at the doors of Olympus. And we liked it! I found another troll. It's an optional fight, but it's on the way. When its health gets lower, it spawns a bunch of ranged enemies. But I figured I could use the resources that I'd get for making it through the fight. Good thing that everything it dropped was fucking useless! We go hunting again because that went so well last time. And while he couldn't bore through its hide the first time, he got it on his second go. It ran off, but I tasked him to catch it. While it couldn't hide from him, we then meet what has absolutely become my least favorite character in the game. We help to try to heal him at the request of this lady, but if I could ask a more meta question, why the hell do spells always have to be said like this? It's always so fucking breathy. She of course does it again. It doesn't make it sound more epic, mysterious, or more magical. It just makes it more obnoxious. See, that's just better. Fucking fight me. Casting magic shouldn't sound like you're just trying to fog up glass.
The gods of these realms don't take kindly to outsiders.
Is this because I criticize your verbal components? I bring her material components, and it's a good fucking thing that magic doesn't care about ratios or even general quantities. I guess. Also, what did stirring those ingredients accomplish? It's not the easiest thing in the world to see, but that shit looks whole to me. And then she spreads the whole ingredients across the board? Like, sure, magic, whatever. But did she magically convert it from solid to powder or liquid during the act of setting it down? If so, that sounds like an incredibly irresponsible use of magic. Did the ingredients being in proximity produce magical goo just because? The fuck happened between this and this? We get our first encounter with nightmares, and their name seems a lot more fitting than the last time I fought them. They're small, so hitting them is harder. They're flying, so hitting them with some moves is almost impossible. They seem to have just enough health to survive almost every runic attack in my arsenal, and a lot of them will chase you down to self-destruct if they're hurt, but not killed. And fucking everything does a shit ton of damage in the New Game Plus. And also the hardest difficulty. I did this myself. I see the world's largest snow rope for what is definitely the first time. I know it's basically just a scaled up version of the real animal, but like, the visuals and sound design of this fucking behemoth is just glorious, and I am here for it. Will you look at the size of those fish? Edible meat, ripe for picking, and going straight to Brock's pet, fucking gratitude. Doesn't he just have a way of naming things?
And whatever you do, never, ever.
I find that the more I emphasize the necessity to not do so, the more outlandish it'll seem when it's a pivotal action to the plot. It's ironic or some shit. The game casually throws in enemies that can heal. It wouldn't be a big deal because you can really easily interrupt their healing by damaging them. In any other playthrough, I either needed to burst them all the way down, or space out my attacks to only hit them just before they healed, and hope that my other attacks would come off of cooldown in time to handle them. It wasn't a huge issue in the long run, but this was something I had to genuinely consider and strategize around. And Sindri, my personal favorite of the two brothers. Odd line of work to get into for a guy who's incredibly uncomfortable with bodily fluids, but passion for one's craft can propel you through a whole lot of things, I suppose. With my son's upgraded armor, these things really can't stand up to his damage output for nearly as long as in my first playthrough. The poor kid wants to carry his mother. It means a lot to him. And he says,
It meant more to me than you anyway.
which is really insensitive, but he also has next to no experience socializing with anyone. Frankly, he's amazingly well adjusted for having grown up in seclusion. Then comes an ogre fight with a bunch of healing dudes. Fun fact, even with arbitrary restrictions and in the hardest difficulty, ogres are really easy to handle if you can time your dodges reasonably well. They also do a number on the other enemies, so they're sort of a boon to have around. I had, not one of my hottest ideas. Really, I should have pot that through more. After finally getting a good ways up to our destination, the Witch of the Woods pops in to be like, "Hey dummies, I followed you all the way here to tell you that you should turn back," then decides to escort us personally. Couldn't just, let us know before we came all the way here? I'm not letting this go! What the fuck? Oh, what? You didn't want to put the entirety of your lungs into that single word there? Oh, look at me! I'm sending you to a magical plane of existence that uses the power of light as a resource for things like basic traversal. Instead of sending you with the ability to get around, I'm showing off the Metroidvania mechanic that you'll have access to only later in the story. Then, I'm giving a weak excuse as to why you can't just use it now because I fucking wasted it. Then, I'm sending you on a one-way trip to said plane, knowing full well that one of you is a fucking toddler, and that the inhabitants of the plane have been at war for as long as anyone can remember. Why not send a baby to a war zone? Think of all the skills they can learn, like coping with PTSD! Or better yet, fucking dying! It being dim means that the Dark Elves are in control. We later learn that the Light has traded hands between the two factions over 200 times, and she acts like she either has no idea, or that this somehow isn't a common occurrence. I might believe she didn't if it was someone else, but her I find hard to believe. Then, while knowing the dangers of the Light, which you need to even have a chance at getting back home, I'm only gonna give a warning about said Light once I'm already here, that way I can get cut off mid-sentence. War, blah blah blah. Dark Elves are really easy to deal with, blah blah blah. Atreus is being haunted by countless voices that only he can hear, including but not limited to what he believes to be his mother, intruding into the Sacred Temple of Light, the center of this whole conflict, which is somehow barely guarded. Atreus is grabbed and I'm thrust into another mandatory rage section. I can't lose any rage or exit it in any way, which I am just so upset over. I'm tip-tapping my toes over this in a vengeful, bloodthirsty fury. Oh, you guys are in for it now! To give you a glance at what a lot of encounters look like, here's Kratos just patiently waiting to get his attacks back. Nothing else I can really do while I wait, so seriously, I can't recommend anyone try this. Combat is either really stressful or really dull, and there is nothing in between. Also, here's a Stone Ancient. They can only really be hit in the chest when they shoot at you. My best attack against them is the Leviathan's Wake, but it comes out so slowly that I can't really guarantee that I'm not just taking whatever attack it's throwing out to the face. Ample use of cover made this go a lot more smoothly, especially when reinforcements showed up. As was typical though, I scraped by combat by a margin slimmer than Kratos' patience. I met with an elf that can spawn more elves if they're not killed quickly enough. These elves can spawn even more elves. And the ones they spawn, the key here is cowardice. No, fuck. Unfortunately, I would have to actually deal with them before leaving this place. When they show up, it usually starts with just one. There are ledges everywhere around here, so while they have a lot of health, the goal is to start every encounter with them by stopping them from summoning long enough to throw them over the edge. How this kills winged enemies 100% of the time, I have no idea. It's nice to meet you and all, but let's keep this civil. Bees! Bees everywhere! This section doesn't allow you to do anything other than swing your weapon to break this thing, and begin to push through a seemingly endless stream of elves to reach another breakable thing. They don't do much damage though. As far as I can tell, there's a scripted face punch, because I sure as shit didn't press that. Also, it turns out that you can essentially just run past all of them. Like, really easily as well. While the run restrictions didn't make this easier, I did have an easier time than my first playthrough on this go-around. Who even needs damage? I step into the light to fix the witch's mistakes, hear about how miserable my son is, and how bad of a father I am. Who needs damage? Atreus apparently fucking doesn't. The little maniac slaughtered a shit ton of these folks while I was off daydreaming about my deceased wife. I now have successfully charged the Bifrost and my child's bowstring. The very concept of charging either of these things with light again will never once be mentioned. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad I don't have to keep coming back here, but there's more than one person with the same Magitech that I possess. One character has it in his teeth. Are you telling me that he shoves his face in the light on the regular to recharge it? Does he remove his teeth to do it instead? Which is worse? How does he get back to charge his teeth if they're out of juice? How does anyone charge anything if this place is constantly at war and actively hostile to outsiders? Why not just walk along the ledge there? It goes almost all the way across and you could probably just swim the rest of the way.
No.
Oh, never mind, I guess. We're attacked by a slightly bigger elf, and it's really not so bad as long as you don't get hit. Of course, as all things in this run, time-consuming as all get out. As long as I don't get hit by any of the bigger attacks, it should be fine. That's alright. Let's just... Yeah, awesome. That's fine too. Another 6 minutes down the drain, but who's counting? They blow up at one another due to rising tension and difficulty understanding one another. While they're very different people, I still find it so wholesome how they're able to reach a level of understanding and bond over their mutual love for Fae. I finally make it back to Midgard, deny my son joy in life, get past the Black Breath, get a lesson in the sizing of giants, and that the term is often misleading with small giants running around. Well, running around is maybe a strong way of putting it, given their lack of population anywhere, but I meet a revenant that deals a lot more damage through shields and summons nightmares. This is about as pleasant as you'd likely imagine, if you're imagining that it was particularly unpleasant. Can we talk about how durable this child is? Just looking at that hurts my ribs. A troll finally managed to be somewhat challenging, because some of its attacks can go through walls, and has a bunch of backup. When my attacks finally come off of cooldown, you're gonna be in so much trouble. Atreus is a wholesome boy that must be protected at all costs, and we make our way into a dragon fight. The initial part really wasn't that bad, despite not knowing what I was doing. Why can you block its bite attacks, but not its claws? In an effort to save my favorite smith, we begin the fight proper. Now, those familiar with the game are probably already asking about the Throne World Tree set that's used to get through the fight, and you're right. Those certainly aren't runic attacks. Thank you for choosing Air Dragon. Please keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times, and don't forget to collect your things before exiting the mouth. As far as I can tell, you need to use the crystals to change faces. You can do so by throwing them when the dragon is charged up. I wasn't able to do much of anything else until I broke its face. After the fact, though, it can be hurt by throwing runic attacks. Now, in exchange for the use of these crystals to change phases, I also reduced its health as much as I could between each phase. You can transition whenever it starts firing off electricity, but you can also put it down to 3 bars, which it does heal most of the damage you do this way, but it's the best I could do to atone for the crystals. Alternatively, they're mandatory. I didn't want to sap it around, but I had no choice. The hitboxes are really weird, but I got into a rhythm of blocking and dodging to eventually get it down. I lost track of how long I spent on this one fight, though. When you reset, you better be dodging before the game even finishes loading, or you're gonna get hit by something. Its attacks get mildly more complicated as the fight goes on, but did you know that the dragon has spots that it can't hit with its beams? You can sort of just hold block and be perfectly safe. Just wait for your cooldowns and toss them out when there isn't a shockwave coming. Had I known this sooner, I wouldn't have spent as long as I did on this fight. I eventually killed it, though. Kratos might deny his motives, but I did it for you, Sindri, my boy. All for you. And also because Atreus is a good kid and wanted to save you. He gives us some mistletoe arrows and shock arrows. Useful for puzzles and... For a while, I was dreading the nightmares that give enemies really high health regen, but runic attacks apparently knock the nightmares right out. So they're really not any harder than basic Draugr. Which, don't get me wrong, still do a shit ton of damage to me because I'm bad, but they're not a big deal. We get to the top of the mountain, where I fix my son's quiver via one of his new arrows. I'll grant you that I don't know how to fix one personally, but this methodology seems odd. I find a few gods, including the man from my house here, asking the smartest man in the world where I am. He tells them nothing, and quickly after requests that I remove and resurrect his head to free him of his otherwise invulnerable bindings. He also urges me to come clean about my child's true nature, let him know that he's a god and all. He promises to get us to the highest peak in all of the lands, which we're apparently not standing on, so we may not go back to square one, but we're not far off of it. I go lopping, and we're off to see the witch. Along the way, we meet Brock. It was while I was writing the script that I found out that the meat that he's currently eating was his pet fucking gratitude. So, glad that I'm cursed with that knowledge. Freya loses her shit about Atreus' new arrows and burns them, then acts like she's a perfectly reasonable person after yelling at my son. She then brings the head back to life. Kratos is pissed to find out that she's a god, and she's really insensitive to his feelings on the matter. I know that he's a dick, but I stand by that she is as well. Despite spending a really long time in this lake and seeing the statue of Thor at the very least once before, the Nope Rope decides only now to eat it. Also decides to help us get to the realm of giants. The first thing we'll need is a magic chisel, which we'll be getting from the tip of the massive hunk of metal currently lodged in that giant's head. In addition though, the tip is under a metric fuck ton of ice. So Kratos gets to work putting together a plan to get through it. I get a lot of combat, struggle, new enemy, not much difference, waiting for what feels like an eternity, and it's Sindri again. Hell yeah!
Well, that was a waste of a perfectly good apple.
My man has a point, that apple looked crisp as fuck. We met a traveler for the first time in the run. Runic attacks don't do much against them, but they don't do much against anything. So these are more or less like fighting everything else. Just gotta make sure to block its massive AoE. On our way to our next destination, Atreus finally has to prove his archery skills, as there's no fucking way of making it through a timed section with a Revenant without having him shoot it. As for the other enemies, they can pretty much all be dealt with by throwing them over the edge to save time. The others being nightmares, which are best handled with Glavestorm. I made sure to kill the last two with my axe, so they wouldn't be caught up in the blast from my son. And we pushed a hammer that was almost as big as my regret for even starting this run. We use it to get through the ice, where we find out 2 minor gods are trolling around looking for us. I almost got the chisel when they could ignore us no longer. Because he came down on an ogre. The start of this fight went pretty well. They do a lot of damage, but they're mostly easy to avoid or block. This is until Magni starts throwing Modi at you. He stalls in the air for a moment, then lets loose a massive AoE that's really hard to avoid. You're supposed to throw your axe to knock him out of the air. And I can, but it's hard to aim. Comes out really slowly, as a janky as heck hitbox is slow to even aim, and if I miss, I die instantly. And that's if it's not currently on cooldown. They upset my son though, so there will be no forgiveness. There will be no mercy. Not here. You have to down them at about the same time, which isn't great to manage, but manage I did. I asked them why they're after me at all, but they didn't seem cut out for answering any questions at the moment. I killed a god for this? It was tiny! Well, off we go, I guess. We're trying to find the travel rune to get where we're going, but Modi shows up again and tries to kill me. This upsets my son, and he tries to enter Spartan Rage. He instead enters unconsciousness. I need to tend to the boy, so... Hey Modi! Magni is dead and he's still better at juggling than you'll ever be! On my way to seek medical aid, I'm repeatedly informed that it was my lies about him being a mere human that have manifested in the sickness that threatens his health now. To fix his mistakes, Kratos takes the boy to Freya despite... things. And then is told he has to go to Helheim to kill a thing there and bring back its heart. A fine mess I've found myself in. I return home to collect the Blades of Chaos that are currently on my back. New Game Plus is funny like that. Along the way, Kratos struggles with his past. He's faced with the memories of the people that he's killed, the lives that he's ruined, the gods he's felled, the world he abandoned to seek a peaceful life. Trying to just pose as a mortal man. But to save his child, he must be more. He must embrace the power once wielded by the Ghost of Sparta. The bright side of this run is that I can actually use the Blades of Chaos this time. The downside is that a lot of the enemies I'm going to be facing for a while are immune to my axe. So, my damage potential just got cut in half in addition to not having the utility of Runic summons. So that's nice.
I can do things.
Me too, buddy. Me too. Then there were a lot of enemies, and despite this being a short jaunt, this took for fucking ever. Deeper into the Land of the Dead, I abuse the fact that I can stand next to the poor sap to make relatively quick work of the boss. I still genuinely like this fight, but I cut out his heart, and Brock gives me the ability to solve the worst kind of puzzle. You can carry an object from one point to another on a time limit. My punishment for failure is backtracking. Having to waste time going back to try over again isn't fun puzzle design, it's just tedious. And coming from the guy that decided that this was a viable run, I don't like this type of addition to my general kit. I bring the heart back to Freya, but how the fuck would she even know that the heart of specifically the Bridgekeeper would heal this specific sickness? Is this something she's dealt with before? How many Bridgekeeper hearts have been cooked into healing soup gas before? She also talks about letting her needs get in the way of her child's needs. She expresses remorse for being a terrible parent and urges Kratos to be a better one. My boys have a heart-to-heart, which is good to see. Communication is incredibly important in all relationships, not just romantic ones. If you're currently sitting on something, maybe consider trying to open up to the people you love. It is scary, but the hardest conversations are the ones that are the most worth having. Do stay safe though. If it's a matter of comfort versus health, I'd rather you didn't get yourself in any trouble, you know? I do genuinely want people to be safe. And as secluded as the world can feel, there are folks out there more than happy to help just make troubles feel that much smaller. Anyways, Kratos fesses up to the whole we're gods thing, which Atreus takes pretty well. Too well, even. Pretty rapidly and concerningly taking on a god complex. The boy saves my life from a trap, only to realize that the trap is ongoing, and saves me from the second half at the cost of an incredibly sentimental knife passed on from his mother. In exchange, Kratos gives him a new sentimental knife from himself. So, his father. It's a sweet moment, if indicative that he's not the best at reading his son and his development. I get that he's proud, but I think this is the least proud he should be of his kid this whole game. His son has been trying his little heart out this whole journey, and deserves recognition for all of it, but he's ironically the most rewarded when he's near his lowest, with this whole brewing god thing going on. Got the rune we needed? I'm cool with troll fights, but this one is a double. One is immune to frost, the other fire. Their health sort of equalizes, so hurting them both around the same time is best. Because while it does sap the health of one to heal the other, the ratio is not in my favor. I spent a while literally running in circles trying to figure out how to handle them. I ended up just waiting for one to swing before throwing out a runic attack or two, and then bailing. Not complicated by any means, but mistakes were painful because they hit really fucking hard.
You only killed those deserving, right?
Yes.
Lies! Then Atreus is a dick to Sindri. Unfucking called for if you ask me. He's then a dick to his late mother. He then kills a god, which greatly upsets Kratos. Though, seriously, while he goes really heavily into holy superiority, I feel like that it's really important to remember that he's also a child, and one that grew up with next to no socialization. Morality is learned, as is pretty much everything that we take for granted in social situations. He hasn't had an environment to pick up those skills. There are a lot of kids that wouldn't be able to handle things even half as well as Atreus does throughout this. This behavior is unacceptable, but it's also understandable. Relatively speaking, he's really fucking well adjusted. We go back up the mountain fighting enemies and each other along the way. Finally able to open the door to Jotunheim. Our success is cut short by Baldur. Kratos gets impaled, my boy gets smacked, the gate gets broken. Atreus really wants to fight, but gets held back by his father. He shoots his father and stabs Baldur. Not really sure what his plan was. I guess he thought he was somehow stronger than Kratos, because Baldur has shrugged off everything so far. Atreus doesn't really hold up well to the whole being stabbed thing, though. Counter to what you might believe, it's rather easy to fell a dragon. Also, does gravity mean nothing to him? It allegedly killed Modi, but I'm falling off of everything out here. With no other choice, I send us all to Helheim to get some distance between us and Baldur. Kratos goes off at Atreus, choosing to respond with anger, further cementing the fact that he really isn't a good father. He's trying, but there are healthier ways to have that discussion.
We are here because of you, boy.
But he's struggling because of you. Now he's your bird and a bear. Because it's cold here. The kid gets to reflect on his actions, which helps him to get back to himself. Again, he's really well adjusted. He needs time, space, and just a touch of guidance to get where he needs to be. Love and support go a long way. We see Baldur upset by the memories of his mother Freya, seemingly regretting not killing her more than anything else. With things still being rather strained, it's time to begin healing. It's time to set sail on this relationship. This section was stressful. I mostly focused on keeping enemies pinned down while trying to relight the fires with runic attacks. It did mean losing out on damage from time to time, but if they both go out, I'm fucked. Yeah, that's definitely what I was aiming for. These revenants are fucking dangerous, and I don't have any good way of healing. With such an advanced AI, I just don't think I stand a chance. You've got this, Atreus! Kick their asses! Yeah, fuck them up! Okay, you did good, boy. Woo! Bring him down! I don't think I could have cut that any closer. Kratos stood up to acknowledge the checkpoint after dying, and then he died again. We make it far enough for my son to see me kill my father. Luckily, one of us stayed focused, and we went punching more holes in ancient architecture. We go over some of Odin's clues on how to get to the realm of the giants. He never figured it out for himself, and it was tearing him up inside. The dwarven duo get together to make us a special key, which lets us get deeper into Tyr's temple. We go through a lot of effort to flip it, and seriously, how the fuck did that not destroy everything involved? That shit clearly weighs a fuck ton, and it comes to a stop almost instantly. That's not how braking systems work. They're explicitly designed for slow deceleration to avoid catastrophic failure. This would fucking explode itself. We find a magic stone inside, which we use to fulfill the ironic never-evers and throw ourselves off the edge of the path that we're never supposed to stray from. Then we get combat, and more combat. And no, waiting for my cooldowns really hasn't become any less painful over time. My cooldown stat was improved, sure, and the time is reduced, but the enemies are a lot harder, and this realistically is about just as hellish as it was at the beginning. So much standing around waiting. Just waiting. To get where we're going, we merely need to get Mimir's eye, which is in the belly of the nope rope, on account of it having swallowed the statue of Thor earlier. I'd like to point out the teeth on the side of its face. All together here, right? Wrong, there's a gap. No gap, gap. No gap, gap. What happened here? Can it individually control that part of its mouth? Because if so, odd choice, but fair enough. I also have to ask, how is light penetrating its skin? How thin is the exterior of this fucking gargantuan creature that sunlight shines through well enough to illuminate its insides? Like, not well, but still. We get the eye, the nope rope goes through some trouble, and we get spat out for a spat with Freya. She's really cagey for little reason, and Baldur shows up to kill me. Also, you're telling me that Baldur can hurt the creature destined to kill his brother come Ragnarok, and he chooses to just leave it be? He changes course to kill her, and Kratos intervenes. Now, if you've seen the other challenge that I did for this game, you might recall that I had a no getting grabbed rule. You can take your way through a lot of bullshit on a lower difficulty. Not so here. Freya grabs you constantly. It's so fucking obnoxious. This fight single-handedly made me forgo that rule. I reset my last checkpoint every time I was ever grabbed up until I had to call it quits here. I just couldn't avoid the sheer amount of times she grabs with next to no warning. He ends up punching the mistletoe arrow on Atreus and making himself killable, much to Freya's dismay, the selfish ass that she is. I finally make her son happy and she's mad about it? She then tries to stop the fight by using the body of a dead giant as a puppet. Then there's Baldur. He's so fucking fast. The delay from pressing buttons to actually throwing out runic attacks has been a problem this whole run, but Baldur can start and end attacks in the time that it takes for a single runic attack to finish its startup animation. So the ones I used had to be very specific. I ended up primarily using a quick swipe called Wrath of Artemis, and a ground slam for the Blades of Chaos called Tartarus Rage. My biggest damage dealer was the River of Knives for my axe, but his light attack was a defensive shield charge by the name Charge of the White Bear. I essentially just had to wait for him to choose to be vulnerable, and avoid as much damage as I could in the meantime. Cooldowns weren't even as bad here, because I usually didn't have an even vaguely safe opening for any of my attacks, so when he starts using elements, the shield charges became a lot more important. The fire slam that he does always felt like it had weird tracking, but you can safely charge through it as long as you don't stop your animation standing in it. After way too fucking long trying, I managed to get him into his next phase where he can just one-shot me on a whim. You can't block the jump attacks, so hitting me meant death, and I was still trying desperately to not get grabbed by Freya's summons. Dodging either felt really inconsistent, and I eventually gave in. This wasn't going to happen as is, and I just needed something different. This phase doesn't even let you use summons to heal, so I went out to get better enhancements, a better talisman, and so on. I improved almost all of my stats and gained a power level in the process. I was able to force my way through with a lot more doing, and after 2 days of attempts, this felt so fucking good. To clarify, it didn't feel rewarding so much as it felt like a relief. A lot of trials and tribulations feel like an accomplishment. This run felt more like self-induced torture. I wouldn't recommend this to anybody. Just don't. There are better things to do with your time, like watching paint dry, or contemplating what the fuck is wrong with you that you thought for even half a second that this was a good idea. Freya keeps saying things like, and realistically, this is all her fault. She keeps acting like it's all my fault that everything is going badly, but she could just leave. Baldur's here because he wants to kill me and her. Kratos is never going to leave while she's around. Baldur is never going to leave while she's around. She's inserting herself into the situation and choosing her own wants over his needs. Again, if there was any reason to be had with him, it's not with her. It's not here, and it sure as shit isn't now. If she loved him, if she ever fucking loved him, she would let him go so that he could heal. He clearly fucking needs help, but not from her. I can now survive a single ground slam. Barely. And I have healing, so the next phase was comparatively comfy. As for everything in this run, the whole thing is a marathon, not a sprint. You're seeing the fucking damage output of my hardest hitting moves here. I don't really have a choice in which one I'm running. But eventually, he goes down. Turns out you really can just wait and not punch the guy. I guess I can take this game off that list. But the rope nopes the fuck out of that giant. Kratos politely tells Baldur to fuck off. Freya tells Kratos to fuck off, to which he kinda does.
But you're free now. You have what you want.
You manipulative gaslighting motherfucker! After constantly choosing what she wants over what anyone else does, she still makes herself out to be the victim somehow, and I really fucking hate her and what she represents. Baldur tries to kill her, to which Kratos says,
The cycle ends here. We must be better than this.
I'm not even going to try to make a joke out of this one. I really like this line and delivery. It's just a good scene. Freya, of course, decides to try to tear Kratos down and damage his relationship with his son, rather than reflect on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this is all her fault. You know, cursing him, pushing him to this, doing literally nothing to actually help him, abandoning him for ages. Kratos has grown a lot, though, and talks it through with his son, because we simply must be better. Seeing that she can't hurt us with her words, she leaves without uttering another. We finally, mercifully, travel to the realm of giants, where the boy brings me to tears.
Carry her.
It's just so wholesome. They learn to face true nature as a giant, meaning he's at least partially one himself. Her kind knew him as Loki, and we make it to the peak where her memory and this run can be put to rest. Because I am not doing the Valkyries like this. Even if I could beat the time limits in Muspelheim and Niflheim, Sigrun has a similar mechanic to Magni and Modi, but she spams the unblockable air attacks a lot more frequently. Is it doable? Maybe. Am I willing to try in my current state? Not even slightly. So I ask again, are you listening, Santa Monica Studio? I know you're not, but it works better for the bit if... Because this run was hell. This run was waiting. I beat God of War by waiting for the fucking Runic attacks all the way until the end. And I'll wait for Ragnarok. Just please help me out here. Don't make it take another 4 years. This time, I'm going on cooldown. But I hope you enjoyed your time here. You probably already know how to use social media, and I hope that means I'll get to hear your thoughts now and on any future outings. Until then, remember to stay safe, spread some kindness in the world, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.